So thanks very much for the kind introduction. My name is Mel Göring. I'm with the German Energy Agency. A bit of a reframing, so I will be talking about TCO a little bit at the end, but actually you're going to be more of an expert in TCOs than I am, but I'm going to try to give you a bit of a perspective on the overall regulatory system in Germany and how it impacts the cost of fuels, the cost of electricity. In the context of our project, the platform for heavy-duty vehicles, sustainable heavy-duty vehicles. Quick word about the DENA on the top right-hand corner, the German Energy Agency. It may sound like we're part of the state, but we're a private company, semi-private company. But most of our project actually comes from the state. So most of the money that we make, is true, comes from the German government. Except for this project, actually. This is a privately funded project, the Platform for Sustainable Heavy-Duty Vehicles. And what our goal is with the platform is to essentially advance the ramp-up of sustainable HGVs and the sustainable fuels that come with that, as well as the infrastructure. Maybe before we start, a bit of context on why we are talking about this. Transport has a pretty heavy impact on the climate. About 1/4 of emissions in the transport sector come from heavy-duty vehicles, which is surprising because heavy-duty vehicles only make up a small percentage of vehicles, right? There's only few heavy-duty cars. So the lever that we have in changing these vehicles is actually pretty high on the CO2 emissions. Why are the emissions so high is pretty obvious. Still 98% of heavy-duty trucks run on diesel, on fossil diesel. And we don't think the amount of trucks that are going to be on the road are going to change anytime soon. We always say, or we know for a fact, that 80% of products that arrive anywhere are being brought by trucks. If you look around, everything that you're sitting on and the different billboards that we have, at some point during their journey, they're going to have been on a truck. So that's why this platform, this project exists, and why we're trying to incentivize alternatives to fossil diesel. Just a quick view, you're going to know this, we're focusing mostly on the really heavy-duty vehicles. There are around 10% of the duty vehicles are actually heavy, and the vast majority are the light vehicles, but we're really focusing on the part on the right. How are we doing that as a project? We have different partners in the industry, in manufacturing, in the fuel sector. We try to collect from them and also from people that are in logistics, such as yourselves, collect their obstacles, current market developments, and the demands that the sectors have, analyze them with our partners, debate them, and try to understand, I hope we're still all safe, try to generate information that's relevant. We have publications and events that we do. And then communicating those to the relevant people, mainly in government, so in the ministries, in the committees, in the Bundestag, and also, at the end of the day, to the press. So now to the alternatives. I'm glad that some of the speakers before me have already put some of it into a certain framing and have mentioned all the technologies that we also see as relevant. We think that in the future, currently the market is completely dominated by diesel. That's just a fact. It's essentially a monopoly. We believe that in the future it's going to look different. There's going to be different vehicles for different applications. And you see the 5, 6 of them, or 4 or 5 of them that we believe are going to have an influence here. First off, of course, green electricity. That has to come from renewable energy, battery electric vehicles. And together with hydrogen vehicles, fuel cell electric vehicles, they make up the so-called zero-emission vehicles. They're called zero-emission because you only look at the tailpipe emissions, as we've already mentioned. And this is why the EU and also Germany is putting an effort into focusing on those primarily. However, bioenergy, bio-CNG, and HVO100 have gained momentum in the past months and years, I would say. Which are considered low-carbon alternatives. The feedstock has already been discussed, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. Manure is one of the main feedstocks for bioenergy and bio-CNG. And for HVO, it's a bit different. It uses mostly vegetable oils, which come mostly from Asia. If we look at the CO2 emissions, green electricity as well as green hydrogen have no, if we look at the tank-to-wheel perspective, have no CO2 emissions and no nitrogen oxide emissions. The particulate matter kind of always stays because the tire wear and the dust on the street, you can't do a whole lot about that. So particulate matter is always there when you use any vehicle. So the possibility is only to halve it, which is the case for battery electric vehicles and fuel cell. The current electricity mix in Germany is like 60%. It's expected to go to 80% by 2030, which is realistic. So we're completely on track when it comes to the electricity market. For hydrogen, it's a bit different. It's also difficult to say what the mix of hydrogen is currently. Mostly, it's gray hydrogen. If you're in a fuel hydrogen vehicle, the mix of hydrogen is mostly gray by methane reforming. And for bio-LNG, this is a very interesting development over the past 5 years. It didn't used to look like this. That 98% of the LNG mix was biomethane instead of natural gas. This is very new. This has mostly to do with a regulation that I'm gonna get to later. That we have seen a complete switch to now renewable, sustainable feedstocks, which has led to a very clean energy mix in the biomethane market. For HVO, of course, we have to compare it to the diesel mix, and the diesel mix, of course, still is completely fossil. So in total, the HVO only has a low percentage, but the emissions that it can reduce are up to 90%. So for each vehicle, up to 90%, depending on the feedstock. But the NOx emissions and the particulate matter, it's not a huge difference. However, we do see it as an alternative for certain sectors. Quick look at the infrastructure. Currently, if you look on the left, charging stations from 150 to 400 kilowatts. There are about 50 in Germany where you could charge a truck. If you go higher than that, to 400 kilowatts, we're at about 10 stations. This is set to increase. There are goals from the German government, the European government, by the AFIR regulation that has a plan of having charging stations every 60 kilometers along the TENT network, the central transport network. So for hydrogen, we have about 50 fueling stations. For LNG, we have about 180 currently. I believe it's slightly increasing to maybe about 200. And for CNG, about 240, but we have to say that CNG, like the fueling stations that you see here, they're not necessarily established to be used by heavy-duty, long, huge trucks. It really depends on the station. Most of the stations, some of them don't have enough pressure, so if one car is fueled, then it's going to take some time to fuel another car. But this can all be retrofitted, so if you talk to your provider, they can retrofit every station to the needs that one has. And lastly, HVO. This changes really quickly. So when I made this, I said there's about 400 stations that are available for HVO. It may also already be 500, but again, these are just normal stations for also passenger cars. These are not simply made by trucks. But this is the amount of stations that we currently have. Now, the reason, I think, why I was invited is because there was a publication that we made that kind of put all the different technologies into framing and connected it to regulations. And there was this graphic that we had in the presentation, which was supposed to show a little bit how much certain regulatory instruments influence the fuel price or the electricity price. And 3 regulations that I'm going to discuss now is the toll, which you're going to be very familiar with, the CO2 price, and the energy tax. And we're going to look at all of these individually. So the toll, I'm probably not going to need to explain to you in detail because this must be one of the main cost factors for you. In Germany, there's essentially two parts of the toll: the regular toll, which has an infrastructure rate, and an air pollution surcharge, which make up most of the money that you need to pay. And then there's a CO2 component, which has only been there for a few years. The CO2 component is supposed to essentially penalize CO2 emissions. It's 200 euros per ton, and it adds on essentially double the amount of the regular toll that's already that's already being priced. Now, it's obviously paid by the logistics provider, and it doesn't differentiate whether we have natural gas or biomethane, and it doesn't differentiate whether we have fossil diesel or HVO, which is something that we criticize in our platform. We believe that this doesn't quite make sense. It would make sense to differentiate the CO2 toll by the CO2 emissions. And here we try to show a little bit how much of an influence it actually has. If you look at the 2025 numbers, you see how for bioenergy, CNG, for HVO, for diesel, the toll makes up a pretty large portion of the cost. Electricity and hydrogen currently are not being are exempt from the toll. But if we look at 2026, there is a change that is planned. Electricity is going to get 1/4 of the infrastructure rate for the toll. So about 1/4 of the toll is what we need to expect when we drive a BEV. However, this is currently in heavy discussion. We do think that this may be amended in the future, and that until 2031, electricity or BEVs and fuel cell electric vehicles are going to stay exempt from the toll extra charge. All of the costs, by the way, I only have this in the first graph, are calculated per 100 kilometers, just so that there's no confusion. And this is why we're talking about 5 euros. So, of course, per kilometer, I think you can do the math. Since the slides are being shown to you, and then afterwards, I just wanted to essentially summarize what I've been saying now. So, for BEVs until 2025, they're exempt from the toll. There's going to be a 25% infrastructure rate from 2026 going on, but that's possibly amended. Same for fuel cell and for biomethane and HVO. They cost exactly the same. They're being exactly the same toll as applies then to fossil vehicles. Now, another interesting regulatory body is the energy tax. The basis for the energy tax, or the minimum standards, are being done by the EU. But the energy tax that we see here, these are the German applications. For electricity, there are 2 cents. For hydrogen, there's no energy tax. LNG and CNG currently have a tax of 2.285 cents per kilowatt hour, or 22 euros per megawatt hour. And for HVO and diesel, again, they're taxed exactly the same, of 47 cents per liter. Now, if we look at the impact that this has, for electricity, the impact on the cost is not super high. We're talking maybe about 3 euros. For hydrogen, there is no energy tax. It's completely exempt. Bio-CNG, Bio-LNG, currently in 2025, the price is at 22.85, which is a reduced price. So the normal price is at 31.80, and the normal price is going to be reached again in 2027. But currently, the price for gas is reduced in general. Biomethane has profited from that, but so have other alternatives, or so has natural gas. And currently, for gas, this makes up about 6 euros in 2025. In 2026, it's going to be 7.50, and in 2027, it's going to be 9 euros. So maybe 3 euros on top from today's perspective. And for HVO and diesel, there's not really any change expected in the future. Summarized, an amendment is quite unlikely in the electricity tax. There were discussions whether the electricity tax should be set to the minimum EU standard, but this discussion in Germany has pretty much died off currently. And for LNG and HVO, just said in 2026 there's going to be a change, and then it's going to be quite stable. Now the last one that I would like to show you is the CO2 price. This is a very interesting one because it's completely unpredictable. So what I'm showing you now are scenarios, but we simply can't know exactly what's going to happen. Today, it's still very predictable because the price is being set in Germany at 55 euros per tons CO2. So the price for CO2 currently in the transport sector is set at 55 euros. In 2026, that's going to change. There's going to be a corridor of 55 to 65 euros. And in 2027, the national emissions trading scheme is going to be integrated into the European emissions trading scheme, ETS2, together with the heating industry as well, or the buildings industry. And what's that probably going to do? We're going to have a lot of demand for certificates, for ETS2 certificates, but there's only a limited number of them. So we expect the price of fossil products to rise pretty steeply. And we all know who's probably going to have to pay for that. The users are going to be the ones to pay for that at the gas station. So putting that in numbers again, currently we're at 55 euros. This makes about 5 euros that the CO2 price makes of the fuel price. So it's important to note that even though I differentiated it here, the CO2 price is just part of the fuel price. So the fuel producers, they can decide on how much of that CO2 price they want to put towards you as the end users. At some point, there's no other choice. But currently, this is how much of the fuel price it actually makes. Now, let's say we go to 100 euros per ton. Sorry, it says liter, but we mean ton. Let's say it's 100 euros per ton of CO2. That is a conservative estimate. I know it sounds a lot, but we have estimates that range from 100 to 400 euros per ton. So let's say it's 100 euros. We're expecting, or we know that it's going to be 9 euros of CO2 price within the fuel price. And if we go to 200 euros, which is still realistic, we would look at 16 euros. So that is a steep increase in the price for diesel or for any fossil fuel product. And of course, that is going to significantly impact the economic competitiveness of sustainable alternatives. Summarized, influence only on the fossil fuels in the mix. Now there's,
Getting back, so you expect a huge increase from 27 onwards?
2027. This is when the switch is going to happen, and if there is an impact, then that is the time when the impact is going to show pretty quickly.
But there is a cap in place in the first 3 years on the euro per tons, or not?
Yeah, it's a cap and trade system, so the cap is in place to make sure that the numbers of certificates are limited.
No, but also at the moment that the price exceeds, and I don't know exactly, but 90 euros per ton, then they will release more certificates to the market to, in the first 3 years, keep it at the 90 euro max. What I read in the directives.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's a 90 euro max. Yeah, let's look that up, because the overall worry is that the price, as you say, is going to be so high that it's going to significantly influence fuel prices. But let's look up if the 90 euro max is the right number. But so the rise from 2027, that's definitely the time when the ETS2, or when the German system is going to be switched into ETS2, the European trading scheme. So that's when the price is completely based on the market. And now two interesting regulatory influences I would like to mention also is the THG quota. The THG quota requires fuel suppliers to reduce their emissions. 10% by 2025, 25% by 2030. How can they do that? They can do this by feeding biofuels into the system, by selling biofuels, by selling anything that's connected to electric mobility, charging stations, etc. producing e-fuels or simply being part of the quota trading. Now, in the past, I've mentioned this has led to a complete switch from fossil methane or natural gas to biomethane. And currently also in discussions on a European level is a ban on palm oil residues, on palm, which are currently imported from Asia and are, for example, being used for HVO. And also there's, in discussion, is a ban on imports from countries that don't allow independent site visits. So the reason why there were supposedly where there was fraud in the relabeling of HVO was because it's not possible in China to have independent site visits, so the site on where the fuel is produced. And this has led to huge amounts of HVO flooding the market, which has led to a TGO quota or THG price to drop. And in order to make sure that that doesn't happen, the amounts of feedstock from China coming in is supposed to be limited, or they need to prove that their feedstock is actually sustainably sourced. And now the last one that I would like to mention is the CO2 fleet emission standards, which is an EU regulation. The goal here is to get manufacturers to reduce the emissions of their fleet, so of the vehicles that they sell. By 2025, they need to reduce the emissions by 15% from 2019 going forward. And by 2030, it's 45%, and by 2040, 90%. There are heavy penalties for every gram of CO2 that is being emitted on top of what you're supposed to or what you're allowed to emit. So there's a huge incentive for manufacturers currently to increase the quota of zero-emission vehicles that they sell. Now there are possible changes, and this has already been mentioned on the EU level, which is the recognition of low-carbon fuels. This could either be made with recognizing the mix of fuels that are currently in the mix, and thereby reducing the goals that the manufacturers need to hit. So essentially, the CO2 emissions that the average manufacturer would need to hit could just simply go down because there's renewable fuels in the mix. Or by recognizing so-called e-fuel-only vehicles or low-carbon fuel-only vehicles. The technicalities of this need to be discussed, because you would have to be able to prove that your car is only being driven with carbon-neutral fuels and not with any other fuel. And yeah, there's currently discussions around whether or not this is possible. But there are heavy demands from the industry for that to happen. Okay, now you might say, okay, we've now discussed, or you told us about the toll, you told us about the energy tax and CO2 price. Okay, they make a part of the price. But of course, I have a TCO perspective. I look at all the costs. I look at the energy prices. I look at the vehicle costs, the infrastructure and insurance. So I want to give a bit of an exemplary TCO to just explore how certain parameters are different and how the cost factors differ in each of the vehicles. So just as a note, this is not the TCO that is applicable to every company. It's highly individual. We just want to give a bit of an idea of how they differ. So if we look at diesel, the toll, as mentioned, makes up a pretty large percentage, around 15–20% of the total cost. Same goes for LNG and HVO. But of course, the largest portion is always the price for the fuels. We calculate with 165 for the diesel price in this case. And if we look at battery electric vehicles, there is no toll, which makes the energy price even more important. So in this case, I think we calculate with 45 cents, which is sort of a middle measure. It changes if we think about depot charging with a lower, much lower price. But what's most interesting here, besides the toll, is the depreciation. And that's what many people are criticizing about battery electric vehicles, about fuel cell, is that, of course, the price is much higher, and therefore also the depreciation is much higher. And there currently is no real secondary market for battery electric vehicles. For diesel vehicles, there's a second market. There's probably even in Germany, there's a second market. And most of Eastern Europe, there's a third market. And then they could also argue that there's a fourth market. And for the newer technologies, since the technological advances are quite high and are quite fast, this isn't the case. So that is a big difference. For LNG and CNG, this isn't the case. This isn't as extreme. The technology is quite stable. So the depreciation isn't as strong, by far not as strong, as for electric vehicles and for hydrogen. And yeah, I mean, one look maybe at hydrogen. We calculated here with a price of 13 euros per kilogram, which is a realistic price, which is what's currently being priced. Of course, there's a lot of estimates that say the price could go down to below 5 euros, and if that is the case, hydrogen is going to become competitive quite quickly. But currently, we don't quite see that happen. The price of 13 euros is sort of an average that I took actually quite before this presentation. Right, and in this last slide, what we did, we increased the CO2 price to 200 euros. So you can see that the diesel price increases steeply. And at the same time, we changed the depot charging into 25 cents, which makes electric vehicles a lot more competitive. But at the same time, the infrastructure for that needs to be built, which also feeds into the TCO. But as we see in any case, LNG and CNG are always cost competitive, yeah, with the diesel trucks in these scenarios. Okay, I don't know how many minutes I did. Just a few last remarks about us. So what we do, we produce publications like the one that you just saw now. We have publications on the expansion of charging infrastructure. We talked about the possibilities of HVO. We did a survey on the investment readiness of logistics companies into low carbon and zero emission vehicles, which may be interesting to you. And anyone here who has a logistics company and is based in Germany, please feel free to take part in that survey. We want to find out how willing logistics companies are to invest into alternative vehicles. And we also talked about the energy taxation on different kinds of fuels. And yeah, lastly, we do events. We had, for instance, lately we had a parliamentary breakfast where we talked to people from the transport committees. And maybe one special thing about our platform, the CEO of DENA, Christina Haferkamp, is also the speaker of our project, which is quite special. Not many projects in the DENA actually have this. This is our team, and we get a lot of support. Of course, the entire support of the electricity team, a bioenergy team. We have a separate bioenergy team, hydrogen tech team, and they give us technical help on all these issues. Now, all this data that you just saw, we have it in our publication. Unfortunately, it's still in German. If you want to have it in English, feel free to contact me. I will contact you as soon as we have it in English. We're currently translating it. Yeah, this has my contact info. Feel free to contact me at any point, and yeah, open for questions. And yeah, happy to discuss later as well. Thanks.